Hi, I'm Marcus Breen from the Communication Department at Boston College, and I'm here to talk about artificial intelligence and the moral economy in China. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So I'm going to talk about this question of what artificial intelligence looks like in China when we think about it through the lens of a moral economy. And in order to do this, I want to set up a couple of questions. This is a brief presentation. So what kind of moral economy framework applies in China? And we'll get to what a moral economy is in a minute. Then what characteristics of such a moral economy framework apply in particular to artificial intelligence? And because I don't have sufficient time, but it's worth thinking about how different the Chinese approach is to the Western liberal democratic one, and how profound that difference is, and really fundamentally how important it is that those people who are not from China or with a different orientation, that is a Western orientation, a liberal democratic orientation, or even a social democratic orientation, we all need to learn to think somewhat differently about an entirely different system. So I've tried to establish a pretty simple dualistic ideological typology for the moral economy. Both of them are based in a reading of Marxist theory around social order and economic and political economic life. So in the Western Marxist tradition, E.P. Thompson, the author of The Making of the English Working Class, was very much a post-structuralist. He believed that if you could just describe how people were living, that empirically was adequate. And his theory was then looking at the 17th and 18th century and the rise of the industrial age, or the industrial revolution in England, and the complications and dislocations it produced, led him to basically say that crowds' rights in the common, that is their freedoms to move around in public land, were overwhelmed by the private and capitalist market forces. And this of course led the people or the crowds to protest. And that's what liberalism in some ways is premised on. Now it's a very short summary, but that's what that is. The Chinese Marxist way, of course, is slightly different. It stems from Mao Zedong and revolutionary ideas continuing in President Xi Jinping. And this is more a structuralist approach. Okay, so there are still crowds' rights, but the rights exist within the nation as a community. And that idea of their rights is managed by the party, not by individuals, and not within what we might think of in the West as liberalism. And this produces a long-standing alignment with a very long tradition within Chinese society and culture, and that is a consensus. But this time the consensus is within the socialist vision established by the party. Now, this leads us, of course, to the big picture of what the Chinese political economy is like. And firstly, we need to understand that what we're looking at is Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is fairly complicated, but it's still the clear ambition of the party and of the nation. And that party has a very clear set of ambitions to manage its national development. Now, every nation and every government does this, but in China, it's a single party. None of this liberal stuff of lots of different views, right? There's a single party idea, and that party says this is what we want to achieve. And so this is the party then representing what it believes is the people. What this means for artificial intelligence is that artificial intelligence then is seen as having enormous utility. And because there is such a large population in China, nearly 1.4 billion, then this means that data, or big data, becomes a huge resource, unimaginable to any other country. Even if you put the United States together with North America generally, it'd take a long time to get to 1 point something billion. The Chinese already have this, and the data that's being produced is massive. If you're interested in looking at this and getting a better exploration of it, you can look at the Kaifeng Li's book from last year, AI Superpowers in China, Silicon Valley and the New World Order. So the political economy of China is clearly different. And of course, when we put the pieces together, we get into assemblage theory or assembly. And so it's, as usual, it's pretty complex. So firstly, as I said, we have a party and the President Xi direct what the nation should do. And of course, national development has been somewhat easier once you integrate and then, if you like, combine public policy or national policy programs with information and communication technologies and now artificial intelligence. Remember that we're talking about a national and global telecommunications network and grid, and so this is pretty well advanced within China. There's a couple of examples, quite profound examples, of where the party has set very clear guidelines for national development with digital technologies. The first one I'm using is the Civilized Internet campaign of 2006, and you can see what it includes. The sorts of things that in the West people take some umbrage to quite frequently. Discipline yourself, don't spread rumours, don't have pornography, use technology to alleviate crime, to identify criminals or people engaged in criminal activity and antisocial activity sometimes, establish and apply the rule of law, use your real name to identify yourself, none of this anonymous business, and do not vilify people. In other words, be polite to people. Now these, if we were to look at intercultural communication, we would realise that these are very long-standing traditions pretty much within Chinese culture. I'm not going to get into that now, but it's important to recognise that these haven't come out of the air, been plucked out of the air by the party. They're connected to long-standing traditions in China. More recently, we've got the social credit system, and this is a system that's highly controversial and is devised from the party, and it's called the top-level down, or top-level design. It is down from above, and the idea is that firstly, it will surveil everybody in the society, and secondly, it will encourage people to trust each other, because everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Now this is quite foreign to a Western view of social life, but again it seems that it's a system that we need to pay some attention to, and the social credit system is pretty well advanced 5 years after it was introduced. The other point I want to make is just to think about how individual development doesn't happen in isolation from the community, but is directly connected to it. So here are a couple of points from an article just published recently about how people should speak and engage with each other. And if I go back, you'll see that it has some direct connections to the civilized internet, right? Speak sensibly and morally with a communal orientation, right? Think about the other people around you when you're speaking, and practice performing good citizenship. Don't just think about yourself only, but think about what you as a citizen are doing. Now these are, again, part of this large layering of shared Chinese values. Things like self-cultivation, family harmony, state governance, and benefits for all. And I think the benefits for all is an important one to think about from the political economic perspective, because it isn't about self-enrichment as much as it is about state-guided benefits for everybody within that socialist model. And of course, how AI connects with this is to use its knowing or learning neural networks to embody the social credit that the Communist Party want, that the Maoist ideals are set, and which President Xi values, and which they're seeking to amplify. And big data makes this possible. As I said before, the billions of people who are producing data mean it's possible to produce and advance artificial intelligence at a very high rate of speed. So what's the Chinese moral economy in AI? Right? Firstly, it's a structure, right? And it's a very clear structure where its intention is primarily to consolidate national development, which has been a huge target, of course, and ambition since 1949 and the revolution, and certainly more recently since the move to integrate the one-party system with a style of capitalism that's unique to China. So we need to understand the national political economy is connected to the kinds of ambitions that are relevant to artificial intelligence, and to recognise, as can be quite interesting to think about, the fact that there's a fair bit of consensus that what people are increasingly saying in China is that they're comfortable with this, that they're making a contribution to national development. And finally, just to give you an indication of what's happening, thanks to my friends at Tencent, in one of their news programs, you can see how, without any questions, the machine writer is doing journalism and it's producing material for people. Thank you very much, and I look forward to more interactions with you at a later date.